Marcus never liked driving at night in the dead of winter. The streets were too quiet, the shadows too long, and the chill too heavy for comfort. That night, the air was a knife pressed against his cheeks as he rolled down a nearly deserted road. The heater in his old sedan was working overtime, humming low, sending out weak gusts of warm air that barely held back the icy claws seeping through the windows. Snow from a storm earlier that day had crusted on the sidewalks, and thin sheets of ice glistened beneath the streetlights. He wasn't speeding, wasn't swerving, wasn't doing anything wrong at all, just heading home after a late shift at the warehouse. His hands were steady on the wheel, fingers tight on the worn leather cover. Then, in the rearview mirror, he saw it. Red and blue lights burst to life, slicing the darkness. His stomach dropped instantly, like a stone in water. Marcus signaled and pulled over. The tires crunched against ice as he eased the car to a stop on the shoulder. For a moment, he sat still, watching his own breath cloud the cabin. He could already feel the cold creeping in from outside, but he knew he'd have to roll the window down. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered it. The night air swept in, merciless, stinging his face. 2 officers stepped out of the cruiser. Their boots crunched over the icy ground as they approached. The taller one tapped his flashlight against Marcus's window. The beam shone directly in his eyes, making him squint. "License and registration," the officer said, his tone sharp, almost impatient. Marcus complied without protest, pulling out his wallet and handing over the documents. He could feel his pulse in his temples. There was no reason for his heart to race. He hadn't done anything, but years of experience told him that reason had nothing to do with it. The second officer circled around the car, peering inside like he was hunting for something out of place. Marcus sat still, both hands resting clearly on the steering wheel, every motion measured, deliberate. He knew too well how easily things could go wrong. After a pause, the tall officer leaned down. A smirk curled on his lips. "Step out of the car." The command wasn't shouted, but it carried weight. Marcus swallowed and obeyed. He opened the door slowly, the hinges groaning in the cold, and stepped out onto the slick pavement. The icy wind cut through his jacket instantly, biting at his skin. "Hands where I can see them," the second officer barked. Marcus raised them slightly, palms open. His breath spilled into the frigid air, visible in white puffs. He tried to steady it, but nerves made it come faster. He was shivering already, though he didn't know if it was the cold or the dread gnawing at his insides. The tall officer looked him up and down, his flashlight beam trailing lazily over Marcus's body before settling on his face. "Tell me, you work out?" he asked suddenly, his tone mocking. Marcus blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me." The officer's smirk widened. "Push-ups, right here. Let's see how many you can do." For a second, Marcus thought he'd misheard. Surely the man wasn't serious. But the other officer chuckled, and Marcus understood immediately, they weren't asking. They were entertaining themselves. His chest tightened, heat burning under his ribs despite the cold air. He considered refusing, considered speaking up. But he looked at the two of them, at the way their hands rested casually near their belts, and the thought withered in his throat. He lowered himself to the ground. His palms slapped the frozen pavement, the shock of it shooting through his bones. It was like pressing his skin against ice. "Go on," the tall officer said. Marcus started pushing. 1, 2, 3, the pavement scraped at his hands, the frost stung through his thin gloves. His breath came out ragged clouds, hitting the ground and vanishing instantly. He could hear their laughter above him, cruel and sharp, cutting into the night. By 10, his arms were trembling. By 15, his chest felt like fire, the bitter cold mixing with the burn of exertion. His body wanted to collapse, but he forced himself to keep moving, jaw clenched. He wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing him quit too soon. "Look at him," one officer snickered. "Like a damn machine," the other added. "Bet he does this every night before bed." Their laughter rang louder, the sound carrying in the empty night. Marcus focused on the rhythm. Down, up, down, up. Each push-up was a silent vow. He wouldn't let them break him, no matter how hard the ground cut into his palms, no matter how the cold sank deep into his bones. By the time he finally stopped, his arms were shaking uncontrollably. He rose slowly, breathing heavy, his skin prickling with cold sweat. The officers were still smiling, still entertained, as though they had just finished watching a show. Marcus stood there, chest heaving, every muscle screaming. He didn't say a word. He didn't trust himself to. He just looked at them, eyes steady, and for a brief moment, the smirk on the tall officer's face faltered. The ride to the station should have been routine. Instead, it felt like Marcus was being dragged into some strange theater where he hadn't been given a script. He sat stiff in the back seat of the cruiser, hands on his knees, staring out at the frozen streets racing by. The heater was blasting, but he still felt the chill of the pavement clinging to his palms and the humiliating laughter ringing in his ears. He could almost still hear it echoing, like a tape stuck on repeat. The tall officer was driving now, one hand lazily resting on the wheel. His partner reclined in the passenger seat, chuckling every so often as if remembering some private joke. They spoke freely, as though Marcus wasn't even there, their words carried on the rhythm of the engine's hum. "You see his face when he hit 20. The passenger said, snorting. "Thought he was gonna collapse right there on the ice." "Yeah," the driver replied, his smirk audible in his tone. "But he didn't. Stronger than he looks. Guess all that lifting boxes pays off." Marcus stayed silent. The anger that had burned hot during the push-ups had settled into something colder, heavier, sitting in his chest like a stone. He wanted to speak, to ask them why, to demand an explanation, but every instinct told him not to. Silence, he reminded himself. Silence was safety. The cruiser rolled through the empty downtown, its lights flashing against storefront windows, painting them red and blue. The streets were nearly deserted, just a few late-night stragglers bundled in heavy coats. Marcus caught glimpses of them staring as the car passed, their faces briefly lit by the pulsing glow before fading back into the shadows. At one stoplight, a figure on the sidewalk raised a phone. Marcus's eyes flicked toward it. The man's arm was extended, recording. For a split second, their gazes met through the glass. The man's eyes widened as if he understood something Marcus hadn't dared to put into words. Then the cruiser pulled forward, breaking the moment. Inside the car, the officers carried on their conversation. "You think anyone'll believe him if he talks?" the passenger asked. The driver laughed. "Who cares? It's his word against ours. And who do you think they'll side with?" The words stabbed, but Marcus kept his expression blank. He was used to being underestimated, dismissed, even humiliated. But something was different this time. That brief flash of a phone recording, the stranger's wide eyes, it planted a seed. Maybe what had happened wouldn't stay buried in the frozen dark. By the time they reached the station, Marcus's body was exhausted, his arms sore, his lungs still aching from the cold air forced in and out of them. They didn't charge him with anything. They didn't even give him a reason for pulling him over. Instead, they released him with a warning to drive safe, and sent him back into the night, as if nothing had happened. Marcus walked away from the station, the icy wind biting at his cheeks, his hands stuffed deep into his pockets. Every step echoed on the frozen sidewalk. His breath plumed in front of him, dissolving into the dark. He was free to go, but the weight of the humiliation pressed down harder than any set of handcuffs could have. When he finally reached his apartment, he collapsed onto the couch, the silence wrapping around him. He pulled out his phone, thumb hovering over the screen. There was a part of him that wanted to bury the night, pretend it hadn't happened. But another part, deeper and more insistent, told him that silence had already cost him too much. He scrolled through the news feeds aimlessly, trying to distract himself. Then his breath caught. A video, blurry but unmistakable, had surfaced. The title screamed in bold letters, "Cops force man to do push-ups on ice." The clip was less than a minute long, but it showed enough, the officers standing over him, laughing, while Marcus strained against the frozen ground. The comments were already flooding in. People were outraged, voices spilling anger and disbelief in every direction. Some shared it, others demanded action. It was spreading fast, faster than he could have imagined. Marcus sat back, the glow of the screen lighting his face. His hands trembled, not from the cold this time, but from something else. A shift, a crack in the wall he'd always thought was unbreakable. For once, he wasn't invisible. For once, his silence wasn't going to be the only story told. Outside, the city still slept under its blanket of snow, unaware that by morning, everything would change. Morning sunlight cut through the blinds in narrow stripes, painting Marcus's living room in pale gold. He hadn't slept much. His phone had buzzed through the night, vibrating across the coffee table with notification after notification. Messages from friends, reporters, people he hadn't heard from in years. Each time he glanced at the screen, the numbers were higher. More shares, more comments, more outrage. The video of him doing push-ups in the freezing dark had spread like fire through dry grass. He dressed carefully, even though exhaustion tugged at him. A pressed shirt, a jacket that carried quiet authority, polished shoes. Not because he wanted to impress anyone, but because today wasn't about him being a warehouse worker or just another face in the crowd. Today, he had to stand as something larger, something the officers who mocked him never imagined he could be. At City Hall, the air was thick with tension. The lobby buzzed with journalists, their cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward, voices rising in a dozen overlapping questions. Marcus slipped through the crowd with practiced calm, security guiding him toward the chamber upstairs. He kept his expression neutral, though inside, his thoughts were racing. By the time he entered the council chamber, it was already full. The air hummed with anticipation. Reporters filled the back rows, pens scratching across notepads. City staff murmured to each other. And in the center, a cluster of uniformed officers sat stiffly, their faces pale, eyes fixed on the table in front of them. Marcus took his seat at the head of the oversight committee. He rested his hands on the polished wood surface, steadying himself. The cameras clicked. The room quieted. The police chief cleared his throat, trying to maintain composure. "Councilman Davis," he began, addressing Marcus formally, though the words sounded strained. "We are aware of the incident circulating online. We're conducting an internal review." Marcus met his gaze, his expression unreadable. "An internal review," he repeated slowly, letting the words hang in the air. "Tell me, Chief, would that review have happened if the video hadn't surfaced?" The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. The chief shifted uncomfortably. The officers at the table avoided eye contact. Marcus leaned forward slightly. "Last night, I was stopped without cause. I was mocked, humiliated, and ordered to do push-ups on frozen pavement for entertainment." His voice didn't rise, it didn't need to. The quiet authority in it made every ear in the room bend closer. "This isn't about me alone. It's about what too many people in this city endure when no cameras are around to catch it." Reporters scribbled furiously, their pens darting across paper. A few flashes erupted from the back. Marcus continued, his tone sharper now, edged with steel. "I've heard the laughter of those officers 100 times in my head since last night. And I know I am not the first to hear it. But I will make sure I am the last." The chief tried to interject, "Councilman, with all due respect." "No," Marcus cut him off, his voice firm. "Respect is earned. And last night, your men showed none. Effective immediately, the 2 officers involved are terminated. Their badges, their weapons, their authority, gone." A ripple of shock swept the chamber. The officers shifted in their seats, eyes wide. The chief's face drained of color. For the first time, Marcus allowed himself to feel the weight of his words. He wasn't just a man who had been humiliated on the street. He was the one with the power to decide what justice looked like. He stood, adjusting his jacket. "Let this serve as a warning. The days of silence are over. The people of this city deserve a department that protects them, not one that ridicules and dehumanizes them. We will hold every badge accountable." The chamber erupted. Some with applause, others with questions shouted over each other. The chief sat frozen, his mouth half open, while the dismissed officers stared blankly, as if unable to comprehend how quickly their world had shifted. Marcus walked out, the sound of clapping following him into the hall. Cameras flashed, microphones reached for him, but he kept moving, steady and unshaken. Each step felt lighter than the last, as though he was finally shedding the weight of the cold night before. Outside, the city looked different in the daylight. The snow sparkled under the sun, the sky crisp and blue. Marcus paused on the steps of City Hall, breathing in the sharp winter air. This time, the cold didn't sting. It felt like clarity, like renewal. His phone buzzed again, messages still pouring in, his name trending across platforms. But Marcus wasn't thinking about screens or headlines. He was thinking about the pavement beneath his palms, the laughter above him, and the vow he had made with each push-up he forced out of his body. Last night, they had tried to reduce him to a spectacle. Today, he had written the ending. And tomorrow, he knew, the fight for justice was only just beginning.